Your testimony to Christ and Holy Orthodoxy. Now, this is a question that I've been asked through my Instagram page, and I do these every Tuesday. So if you want to have a chance to ask me a question directly, be sure to check out my Instagram, Chris Damasos Fit. All links are in the description and in the pinned comments. Let's get straight into the video. So to give you a bit of a background story on my upbringing and I guess my testimony to Christ and the Greek Orthodox faith. Now, growing up in Melbourne, I was blessed with the opportunity to live for the first 4 to 5 years with my grandparents. And my grandparents were non-English speakers. They came to Australia, they migrated to Australia in their 40s, so relatively late from the migrational period for most Greeks that actually settled in their early 20s. So they didn't really assimilate with the Aussie culture. And because they didn't quite assimilate to the Aussie culture, that actually gave me the opportunity to really embrace myself within the Greek culture, because I was essentially forced to speak nothing other than Greek. So a lot of my religious beliefs, a lot of my faith towards the Orthodox religion, a lot of my patriotism towards Greece was birthed through the upbringing of my grandparents. And being brought up in Paran, opposite Aio Dimitrio, we were frequent visitors of the church. Obviously living across the road, it wasn't just a service in which we'd attend on a Sunday. And we'd be pretty much going there every single day. Whether it was on a Monday to clean, whether it was on a Tuesday where the Greek Orthodox community would gather just to talk whatever they'd be speaking about. And I'd be playing with the kids, playing soccer in the church, cleaning the church, riding our skateboards around, doing whatever, always brought up within the Orthodox faith. Now, as I got a little bit older and I started actually playing football, football here in Australia is played on Sundays. And unfortunately, there came a time in my life where there was a crossroads. It was football or church. And unfortunately, we couldn't do the two. And coming from a sporting background, my father playing football, obviously being a young boy, wanting to play football, and the excitement of football is a lot more gravitating to the young man as opposed to going to church. There was a very long period of my life in which church became really a fond memory, at least every Sunday. I'd obviously attend for baptisms, weddings, Easter, Christmas, things of that nature. But I guess my close connection with the church started to dwindle away. But long and behold, I landed into my 20s. And again, I was blessed with the opportunity of being asked to be a best man at my best mate's wedding. Now, in our religion, if you are asked to be the best man, that means that by default, you are to baptize the firstborn child of the couple being married. Now, at the time when my kubaro asked me to be his kubaro for his wedding, of course, I said yes. But I didn't quite know what that entailed. Sure, I knew I'd be the best man, I'd go to his wedding, I'd say a speech, and I'd baptize his firstborn son. But what did that actually mean in a deeper level? And when I actually got asked this was a big turning point within my life for a couple of reasons. Well, firstly, I knew if I was going to be the godfather, the religious figure for my to-be-born God's son, I would at least need to know and have a more in-depth knowledge of where I currently am right now of the Orthodox faith. And that was a big turning point in my life, because at that point in my life, I actually moved away from playing football and I started to become a coach. And it was just a series of events where everything just tied in. I was moving away from being a player to now more of a coach, which is more of a leadership role, to now being asked to be a kubaro, soon to be godfather, more of a leadership role. And as these events kind of married up, I then started to look at life a little bit differently, take myself a little bit more seriously. Because I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to be a coach, which is being a leader, and if I'm going to be a godfather, which is also like being a leader, and I would argue it's probably the closest thing to being a father, which again is another leadership role. If I'm going to lead people to greatness, if I'm going to lead my athletes to becoming better athletes, more fitter athletes, if I'm going to lead my godson to taking the rightful steps in becoming a better man, then I needed to look at myself and ask the questions, am I doing everything in my power to become the best man that I am? And this is where my journey started, and it was beautiful because it really allowed me the opportunity to assess my life and ask the question, I'm taking on a big amount of responsibility, not only for my mate and his wife and their family, but under the eyes of God. Am I going to sit here and take on a role because it sounds cool to portray that I'm a godfather? But what does that role actually entail? And that is where my journey began, I believe, where I came back to my Orthodox faith. And it wasn't like I let it go. I still wore a cross. I still prayed. But I still think there's a big difference between wearing a cross, praying, and actually being involved in the church on a week-to-week basis. Now, I'm not saying that wearing a cross and praying isn't good enough, but when you attend church services, you do feel, I don't know how to quite explain it. It's this feeling when you walk into a church, at least that I get, an Orthodox church that is, that gives me a feeling of being safe, being heard, and being like a sense of belonging. And that's very important, I think, for anybody that is someone of faith to attend as frequent as possible. Praying is good, but attendance tops that above all else, let me tell you. Because you're involved amongst other like-minded people. So anyway, that was my story. And once I became a Kubaro, that led me down the path of really having to think about the bigger picture of how I'm now going to portray myself to this world. And after marrying my Kubari, I actually visited Mount Athos in 2023. And I used this opportunity because I was traveling Greece by myself, and this was another stepping stone of me taking my religious beliefs to another level. Grounding myself, practicing gratitude, putting myself amongst other spiritual leaders in which I can mimic and take a piece of their life that I think is beneficial, that's going to just add another brick of foundation of the person and the man that I want to become. So to wrap this all up, essentially what brought me to coming back to my faith, what brought me to putting me in the situation that I am right now, was being asked to be a Kubaro. And I'm very blessed for that moment. I still remember that moment vividly when my Kubaro asked me to be his Kubaro, because that moment right there, that changed my life for the better. It brought me closer to God. It brought me closer to my faith. It brought me closer to Him. It allowed me an opportunity where now my friendship is not only based on memories, but it's spiritually connected under the eyes of God, with Himself, with His wife, and with His Son. And that blessing itself changed the trajectory of my life from 2017 to where I am right now. And getting closer to God made me rethink on the way I'm acting and portraying myself in this world. And for the better, because now I really look at every single act that I do in this world, from making a video, from going to the gym, from the way I speak to people, fearing the judgment of what God will be thinking. And not in a bad way, but in a way that makes me really think twice on my actions. And that split second where I have an extra thought, what would he think? Typically makes me and pushes me to making the better decision. And of course, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I'm a sinner, which is why Jesus Christ died for us. But since that day where I was asked to be a Kubaro, I have looked at every single action that I'm about to take a little bit more meticulously. And I'm so grateful for that. And that is my testament to the Orthodox faith, in which I could honestly not live without. Guys, if you want to ask me questions, like I mentioned, check out the links in the description and in the pinned comments. Follow me on Instagram, Chris Damas's Fit. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one.